Part two of today's show, Trevor. Let's dive into this is the topic that I think is going to be the most fun to talk about. And we're going to talk over the next little bit about the Notre Dame 2024 team in relation to where they were last year, and then to a degree with some of these topics where they've been in previous seasons. And this, for me, is where my optimism comes from, because when I look at this football team and I think about where they were a year ago, and not just in fall camp, but then how the season played out, I think what some fans might be missing is that while they will be less experienced in certain positions, this is a far more talented football team, in my opinion. And we're seeing the fruits of the Marcus Freeman recruiting, Chad Bowden recruiting, Mike Mickens recruiting, Al Washington and Mike Elston to a degree recruiting with some of the younger guys, but what Al Washington has done in recent years, Deland McCullough and Harry Heastan is an offensive line recruiter for his one class. And then, of course, what Joe Rudolph has done as a recruiter as well. I think we're going to see the fruits of that start to shine this year. So what we're going to do in this next segment, we're going to begin with the offense and then go to the defense and discuss where we believe Notre Dame is better and not as good as they were a year ago. And it's just, we're going to leave that as open as possible. We're not going to narrow it too much so we can convince ourselves to get the answers that we want. We're going to leave it as open as possible. And then one thing we will do, we did have a super chat from Raymond Tittman. I'm going to still answer this, Raymond, even though you made me a little sad earlier with your comments. But he said, Bryan, when you compare last year to this year, can you give a key stat to watch for to measure whether your predictive analysis was right? I'll do that when I can, Raymond, but a lot of it's just going to come down to some of it will be statistical, but you could be better statistically in a place and not be as good as an offense. You know, I don't know that last year's offense was as good as 2015's, but they averaged more yards per pass attempt and averaged, they didn't average more yards per rush. They were almost identical in yards per play. They averaged more points per game. But if you were to ask me if I have to go, play Ohio State, do I want the 15 offense or the 23 offense? I'm taking the 15 offense, right? So stats don't always tell you the story because there's a lot of other context that goes into it. But I will do my best in certain areas where I think the statistics will measure. And this is really going to come into play for two positions for me, running back and linebacker. And so I'll do my best to provide that when I can. But I don't expect Riley Leonard to have as good of a yards per pass attempt number as what Sam Hartman did last year for a host of reasons. So, but I think he'll be more impactful because I think the offense is going to be different. So we will provide that, Raymond, when we can. And I do appreciate the super chat on that. But we're going to begin with the offense, Trevor. And we're going to talk about, we're going to go position by position and then wrap it up with overall. And of course, the place to begin is at quarterback. And so when we talk about better, is the current group better than last year? There's really three aspects to it. Number one is obviously the starter. That matters more than the depth. The starter's important. You don't just say, well, they've got their 4 is better than last year's 4, but there's this huge gap at number one. Well, guess what? Then, then that may be last year's group is better. Depth doesn't always equal better if the guy from previous was that much better than who they have now. The depth is important, though, and we'll talk about that. And when we talk about better, it's going to come down to how do you impact the game? Can this group impact the game greater than last year's group? And so that's what we're going to kind of get into, and it starts at quarterback. And you will go from Sam Hartman, Steve Angeli, and Kenny Minchey last year to Riley Leonard, Steve Angeli, Kenny Minchey, and CJ Carr this year. And so, Trevor, to begin, when you look at the quarterback room, tell me which one you think is better and then why you think it's better or not as good as of right now as what the room was, how it played out last season.
Sure. I get starting with the starter, the guy under center now. I like this year's starter, Riley Leonard, better than where we were at last year for a host of reasons. Simply put, I think he's a more dynamic playmaker. That is something that Notre Dame has been lacking at the quarterback position for a while. I think they might have found that in Riley Leonard. Again, we'll see it here in about 10 days or so, but who's counting? I am. But, I think in comparison to last year, there were a lot of expectations with Sam Hartman coming into the season based off of what he did at Wake Forest. And then when you break it down, different styles of offense, different cadence style. And in interviews before, Riley Leonard said that there's a lot of similarities with what he did at Duke, coming into now what he's doing with Denbrock. So starting with the starter, I like where we're at. And then the quarterback room as a whole, I would say I would take this year's as well. Because not only do I think the ceiling was raised, I think the floor has been raised too. With the addition of CJ Carr. And just it's another year of development that Kenny and Steve have both had. And I think that I would take the 2024 quarterback room over where we had it last year. I think of in terms of if Riley Leonard were to go down, I am more comfortable this year than in comparison to if Sam Hartman gets hurt last year. I think there's a lot more questions of, well, what do we do? And that's where I'm at.
It's interesting. The dynamic of what happened after each player committed to Notre Dame it has to factor into this. And when Sam committed to Notre Dame, the expectation was he was going to play for Tommy Rees. And I think he would have performed better in the Tommy Rees offense than he did in Jared Parker's offense for a number of reasons. And that's not saying Jared Parker was better or worse. It's just different. It's about style fit. Riley Leonard committed to Notre Dame, I believe it was before Jared Parker left. And then, of course, he leaves and Mike Denbrock arrives. The big difference is Mike Denbrock is a much better fit for Riley Leonard than what Jared Parker's offense would have been. And so I think that dynamic plays into it. But I'll be honest, Trevor. I mean, there's no question that Riley Leonard is going to be better than what Sam Hartman was last year. I mean, if all Riley Leonard does is repeat what he did in 2022, he's a better quarterback than what Sam Hartman was for Notre Dame last year. I mean, it's honestly not really that close when you look at what Sam did last year. Now, I think a lot of what happened with Sam last year was outside his control. And I've talked a lot about that. I don't really care to get into that again. Some of it was on him. Some of it was bad luck. Some of it was a lot of other things. But last year, Sam Hartman passed for 2,689 yards and completed 63.5% of his passes and had 24 touchdowns and 8 picks. Rushed for 123 yards and 3 touchdowns. So he averaged 234.3 yards of offense per game and averaged, he was a good, steady, solid quarterback. When you look at Riley Leonard passed for 2,967 yards. Now, that was in one more game than what Sam played. He had 20 touchdowns and 6 picks. Not a whole lot different from what Sam did, although he had a higher completion percentage. He was at 63.8. Sam was at 63.5. The difference is here. Sam Hartman rushed for, as I mentioned, 123 yards and 3 touchdowns. Riley Leonard rushed for 699 yards and 13 touchdowns. Sam Hartman last season had 2,812 total yards and 27 total touchdowns. He averaged 234.3 yards per game. Riley Leonard had 3,666 yards of offense, 33 touchdowns, and averaged 282 yards per game than what Sam Hartman did last year. And I don't see any scenario in which Riley Leonard is less productive at Notre Dame than he was at Duke in 2022. You can complain all you want about the offensive line, but even with the offensive line perceived issues, he still is going to have a significantly better supporting cast around him than he did at Duke in 2022. He's also going to have a better defense at Notre Dame than he had at Duke in 2022. Now, the 2023 Duke defense was very good. It's still not as good as Notre Dame's, but it's very good. But he didn't have that in 2022. They were a solid defense, and any defense that Mike Elko has is going to be solid. But you saw against the offenses with more talent that they'd give up a lot more points. It's facts. So the supporting cast is going to be better. I think that's really what it comes down to for me when a starter. Sam Hartman is not as good of a player as Riley Leonard. And I'll be honest, I mean, anyone that knows my opinion on Sam Hartman versus Riley Leonard, I expected Sam Hartman to be better last year, but I've always felt Riley Leonard was the better quarterback. You could just go back and watch those two guys go at it in 2022 when Sam Hartman or Riley Leonard outdueled Sam Hartman in a Duke win over Wake Forest. And you see how he impacts the game differently. And that's something that Notre Dame desperately needs, in my opinion, this season. So The starter alone makes it better. But as you mentioned, the depth chart, not only is CJ here, Trevor, but Steve Angeli's a year older and Kenny Minchie's a year older. So they're both better versions of themselves last year. If they remain 2 and 3 and CJ stays 4 and he's on scout team all year, it's still better. If CJ Carr wouldn't have signed with Notre Dame, it'd still be better because you'd have the same 2 and 3, but they're both now a year older. And so I think all those things factor into why, to me, quarterback is in a much better position. And the final thing is, last year you had a quarterback that was dependent upon what happened around him. As good as Sam Hartman was, he needed the line to block for him, and he needed the receivers to catch the ball, and he needed the receivers to get open and those type of things. Riley Leonard doesn't always need that. And that's an element, as you mentioned, that Notre Dame needs and now has at quarterback. And I also think they're in a better position to win if he goes down than they were last year to win if Sam went down and you had sophomore version of Steve Angeli and freshman version of Kenny Minchie. You're now better off with junior year version of Steve Angeli, who started a bowl game, threw for 700 yards last year. You're in a much better position now to win with him now than you were a year ago. Same thing is true as Kenny Minchie. And then you throw CJ into the mix, and it's very obvious that quarterback to me is in a much better position than it was a year ago. And so I think that's a no-brainer. This one is going to be a little different. This is a little bit more debatable. Running back. You've got Audric. You had Audric last year. You lose him. He's now gone. You had Jeremiah Love last year. He's now a year older. Jadarian's a year older. Jabron's out. You add Devin Ford still there. You add Keidron Young and Aeneas Williams. So just there's a lot of ways to look at it. You lose Audric and you lose Jabron. You add Keidron and you add Aeneas. Which room is better?
This one was tough for me because it's tough to say that the running back room gets better when you are losing 18 rushing touchdowns. For me, call it a cop-out answer. I'm not going to say they are better. I think that they are deeper. In that they have, like we had talked about before in the previous segment, is there's now 4 guys realistically that can come in and contribute in a multitude of different ways. But like I said, it's just hard for me to say that it is better after losing somebody like Audric. But I do think that the ceiling is higher, I guess, if that makes sense, because of the different ways that they can contribute. That would be my answer for how to look at the rooms in comparison 23 to 24.
I've been back and forth on this one, Trevor. Yesterday on the message board, somebody asked me, or 2 days ago when this conversation happened, I said running back was better. And then I was like, no, it's not better. And then I'm back to, yes, it is better. And I'm back to, I think it's kind of a wash. And I that's why I'm having a hard time saying better or worse. I will say this, it's better than where it was a year ago at this time. We thought Audric was going to break out. We didn't know for sure. You didn't quite know where Jadarian Price was health-wise. You didn't know what he's going to be able to provide. You didn't know what Jadarian was going, or Jeremiah was going to do. So I feel better about the running back room today than I did on August 20th of 2023. After the season played out and how good Audric was, it's a much tougher call. I think you are correct. They are deeper this year of guys ready to play. Are they better? That's a much tougher question to ask. They're less established, but they're more dynamic. Which one matters more? They're not as big as they were last year, but they're more explosive. I mean, so there's every time I think of, well, this is advantage 2023, I have a counter to 2024. Every time I think 2024 is going to be better, I have a counter to 2023. One thing that is going to be very interesting is you mentioned the touchdown thing. Last year, Notre Dame, some of the mistakes they made, like you had 2 4th downs against Ohio State, and neither time your starting running back touched the ball, right? Like that was a coaching mistake. I felt better about Notre Dame lining up on 3rd and 1, 2nd and 1 goal line situations, saying they're going to get a touchdown because of not just Audric, but also Jabron. When in his situations, I mean, he's the one that caught that. I mean, behind his back. Tough throw, touchdown against USC, Jabron was a pretty good red zone guy as well.
Yep.
That's how well they can fill that void. If I had more confidence in that I knew the answer to that, I'd probably go with 2024. Because that's a difference between field goals and touchdowns. I mean, yeah, your guys were dynamic and got you inside the 5, but once you got inside the 5, you weren't as good. Of course, you have the Riley Leonard fact of that as well, which adds to it. But that third and short and goal to go situations is going to ultimately determine the difference. Because I think this group's going to be more explosive. This group is going to be more dynamic. This group is going to be much more impactful in the pass game than last year's running back room. But will this room be as good at getting the tough yards? When the offensive line was not playing well last year, Audric could still get his. Can this group do that? Those are the things that are going to determine what that answer is, Trevor. Because, again, I could sit there and tell y'all right now it's the 24 group, and I promise you we're going to be midway through tight ends. I'm going to be thinking, man, I should probably change my answer and rectify that. You know what I mean? Like, that's what I've been the last 2 days. So I don't know that I have a good answer here. It's kind of a wash for me, but I think it's got the potential to be a lot better as a group. But I think it's far from given because of what we knew about what Audric brought to the table.
I think another thing, too, that I want to factor in is the scheme that the running backs would be playing in. I think that's kind of an unsung thing. Looking at it apples to apples, it's so tough to say, well, who would you rather have? Audric or Jeremiah. It's like, well, they're both respectively great at two of the things that they need them to do. If I were to say, you know what, the offense this year is going to be very pro style. We're lining up with 2 tight ends and we're running it downhill. Yeah, I'm going to go with Audric. I mean, because the dude was a load. You know, he was 230 pounds and was getting 6 yards a carry, half the time on accident just because he couldn't be stopped. Whereas if you were to ask me, hey, we're going to spread it out this year. We're going to run a little bit more tempo. We need the running backs to be able to catch out of the backfield. We might send some in motion. Would you rather have Jeremiah Love or Audric? My answer would be Jeremiah Love. So I do think scheme plays a little bit of a factor in that. Now, I think it's tough to, like I said, compare it even and just taking 2 players and say, who would you rather have? But for their respective systems, if I were to give a hard cut answer, I would say I would take this running back room in 2024 for the system that we have in 2024. And that's probably where I'll cut it even.
I like that. I like that. And last year we did see those 2 young guys look pretty good in some of the bigger moments. And you sometimes often wonder, why didn't they do that more? Jeremiah averaged over 7 yards a carry against Ohio State last year. He looked good. He only had eight touches though. That was the problem, right? Like he should have maybe touched a little bit more, and Audric should have touched a little bit more. Jadarian with what he did against USC, and so I'll say this is a no-brainer. I cannot wait to see if this group can be better because I think it's going to be a fun group to watch. This next one is going to be a little bit easier. Wide receiver. Completely different group than it was a year ago. Completely different group. No Rico Flores, no Tobias Merriweather, no Chris Tyree. Deion Colsey was a regular at the beginning of the season before injuries, and Chancey Stuckey kind of ruined his season. You have no Braylon James as the young potential standout. And we did not know a whole lot about Jordan Faison at this time a year ago. Fast forward to a year, all those guys are gone. You welcome the 3 freshmen into the team, Cam Williams, Micah Gilbert, Logan Soldate. That'd be exciting enough, in my opinion. But now you add Chris Mitchell out of the portal, Bo Collins out of the portal, and Jaden Harrison out of the portal. Plus, now you have sophomore versions of Jaden Greathouse and Jordan Faison and Jaden Thomas and Deion Colsey. I know the answer. I'm pretty sure I know the answer. Which room is better? The 24 receivers or the 23 receivers?
24 receivers. And to your point, this was not that hard of a decision to make. I mean, I think the overall potential of this room is better. You're adding more additional experience with Chris Mitchell and Bo Collins and Jaden Harrison. The young guys have gotten better. And the newcomers in the 3 freshmen, I think that could see legitimate minutes this year. The thing I like about this receiving room is it's very diversified in their skill sets. I felt like last year they had like 6 guys that could all do the same thing, right? And this year you have kind of your segmented groups. They almost have their own verticals, if you will. I mean, you have your deep threat guys. You have KK Smith, and you have Chris Mitchell, and then you have your boundary receivers, kind of your guys that they're not going to torch anybody, but they could be your go-to guys. They're going to be open in the middle of the field, and Jaden Thomas and Bo Collins and Jaden Greathouse, and then you have your quick, speedy slot guys, and that can make moves in the open field with Faison and with Jaden Harrison, who I've been seeing getting reps in fall camp in the slot. So I think that this year everything is more diversified, and everything has been geared towards making this offense so multifaceted that it's just going to be almost impossible to game plan for them, which I love. So short answer, 2024 receiving room.
This is Irish Breakdown. We don't do short answers. and agree completely. I think the diversity point you've talked about, Trevor, I've hammered that all summer. I think that's a great point. You have, and here's why that matters. Number one, it gives you different ways to attack teams. But again, when you have the same group of players, they may be great one week when you're playing a team that's not geared towards being able to defend that type of thing. When I talked about this in 2018, one of the reasons that the pass offense had some issues against Clemson, even though I thought the receivers were open more than they got the ball, what it came down to, you had two big guys for Notre Dame, and Clemson had two corners in Trayvon Mullen and A.J. Terrell who could handle big guys better than anybody else that they played. And so that window was smaller, and Ian Book didn't feel comfortable throwing into it. Now, I thought the receivers played well, but the windows looked way different for Ian, and he wouldn't pull the trigger. And so now you say, okay, well, if you're playing a team that's like got a bunch of 5'9" corners who can't, hey, maybe we see combinations where Bo and Jaden Thomas and Micah Gilbert are on the field together. Or they're playing a team that's got some big corners, but they're kind of not real shifty. And so all of a sudden we're seeing a lot more of Chris Mitchell and KK and Jaden Greathouse and Jordan Fay. You can match up differently. And to teams that can take one thing away, you have answers in other areas. And we haven't even talked about the tight end room and how that's going to impact the pass game and how these guys are going to complement that. The final piece for me, Trevor, is just what we know. Last year, I thought the receiving core was going to be better than it was. I think it was better than it was, meaning there were more opportunities there that should have worked had the coaching been better or the quarterback play been better or the O-line play been better. And we'll get into that here as we get into the season, but it still wasn't as good as it could have been because you were dealing with a lot of ifs. If this guy can help you as a freshman, if this guy can play, if this guy steps up, if this guy can be healthy, if Jaden Thomas would have been healthy last year, he would have had a 50-plus catch, 700-yard season. Why do I say that? How do I know that? Because that's what he did in every game that he was healthy. I mean, that's just what Jaden Thomas does. Actually, I'm gonna do that math here real quick, Trevor, because I want to make this point. Like, you knew that's who Jaden Thomas was. So let's see here. He had, that's 12 catches there, 16 catches divided by 5 games equals times 13. So that's 42 catches. His yards, so he had 188 yards plus 59 yards. You divide that by 5 equals times 13. So he would have had 42 catches for 642 yards last year if he would have just kept the production he had when he was healthy. And that includes being completely shut out against NC State. Right? Like, that's who Jaden Thomas is. But there was always the if he can stay healthy. We talked about if Deion Coles, he can say, Deion looked pretty good in the opener against Navy. And then he was never healthy again. And he got into Chancey Stuckey's doghouse, which is actually a place I'd rather be. Knowing how he was, I'm actually kind of feel I probably did something right if I'm in Chancey Stuckey's doghouse. But there was always these ifs. If. With this group, the if is simply if Chris Mitchell is exactly who he was at FIU. If Bo Collins is only what he was at Clemson. If Jaden Greathouse is just, if he is just the same guy he was last year. These ifs are more determined. Every team has ifs. You could say, well, yeah, Ohio State's going to be good if all the guys that were really good last year play as good as they were, this year. Well, sure, everybody's got those ifs. You think Denzel Burke is going to play as well as he did last year. You think Caleb Williams, they got to prove it, but they're established. You kind of assume that's going to be the case. Notre Dame has over 900 yards receiving coming back from last year on its current roster. They had over 2,000 receiving yards transfer in. That's what it boils down to. Far more established group, far more diverse group, and a group with a lot more speed. Somebody, and John A1, one of our best posters, kind of said, okay, well, look, if you look at it position by position, you say, okay, well, Chris Tyree's faster than Jaden Greathouse, right? And I forget what the other one he said. This guy's faster than that guy. But I'm like, you look at it and you say, Tobias Merriweather's faster than Bo Collins. Is what he said. Well, I'm like, well, first of all, Tobias is not playing that position. Tobias is playing where Chris Mitchell plays, and he's not faster than Chris Mitchell. Yes, Chris Tyree is faster than Jaden Greathouse. But here's the way I look at it. You look at the top 5 speed guys: Chris Mitchell, Jaden Harrison, KK Smith, Cam Williams, and who was the 5th guy that I brought up? I can't remember who the 5th guy was. Jordan Faison. I said, you take those 5 and you compare those to the top 5 speed guys last year, and it's not even close. It's the overall level of speed that they bring to the table. It's not even close. This receiving core now to where it's not even close. Now they got to prove this and that, and I get all that, but it's not close. The receiving core is significantly better and proven right now than it was a year ago at this time, and then with how it played out. I think that's an easy one.
Yeah, absolutely. The ifs have nothing to do with their ability to play football, which is great. I mean, it's, if they can, to your point, if they can perform like we know that they can, like we've seen before. But in previous years, it's, if Tobias can adjust to playing at the big time level, if Chris Tyree can make the transition from running back to wide receiver. A lot of it was based on their ability to play the position, and that's been eliminated this year in this receiving room. There's always going to be what ifs, sure. But that's what's the most promising. And then you combine that with the speed. Yeah, we're cooking.
Last year, if Jaden Thomas was healthy, they're pretty good there. If not, they're in trouble.
Yeah.
This year, if Jaden Thomas is not healthy, that's fine. You got Bo Collins, you've got Deion Colsey, you've got Micah Gilbert. You could move Cam Williams over there. I mean, you could move Jordan Faison. They've done a lot of different things with that position. So that's another difference. If Jaden Greathouse gets injured and can't play in the slot, you've got Jordan Faison, you've got Jaden Harrison. That's a big difference between this year and last year. Is if such and such doesn't happen, you're still fine.
Yep.
And last year, if this doesn't happen, you were in trouble. If Jaden Thomas goes down again, it messed up your whole room. If Tobias Merriweather doesn't break out, it messes up your whole room. And when those things happen, that receiving core was doomed. This group is not going to be as doomed. Let's move on over to tight end. It's basically the same guys they had last year, except now you've added Kevin Bauman. We'll see if he can be healthy, and you've added Jack Larson. But there's some guys that are coming off some injuries. So there's a lot of different ways to look at this. So let's just dive right in, Trevor. What say you about the tight end room compared to where it was based on how last season played out?
I would say, for me, my opinion is it's the same, for the simple fact of you have the same people coming back. I would err on the side of it is better because we finally got to see what Mitchell Evans is like when he can be a premier guy. But unfortunately, in comparison to last year, he's coming off of an injury. Eli Raridan, same thing. I like Cooper Flanagan. He is one of those guys that is kind of raising the floor of the room because he has another year under his belt. But simple answer for me is I'm putting it as the same for right now.
I'm going to push back on one part of that. Mitchell Evans was actually injured last year. The difference was he didn't get injured during the season. He got injured in the spring. So that's kind of the concern though, right? Is can he stay healthy? And it's more of a concern now than it maybe was a concern a year ago, because last year's injury was kind of his first injury, significant injury. Now he's had 2. So I think it's fair to say, I think the injury thing is fair to say, even though he was injured going into last season and kind of had to be brought along slowly, which is partly why he got off to a slow start last year. It's because he did miss a big chunk of the offseason like he did this year. We got to find out if he's able to overcome that, Trevor. And I think that's a good point. Is Eli Raridan going to be back to his old form? He missed a chunk of last season. They limited his reps in the spring, to your point. The reason I'm going to say it's better is because I think those things, everything you said is true. But you're now in a position where if Cooper Flanagan has to be called upon now, he's way better prepared to handle that than he was a year ago. You also have Jack Larson now, which you don't want to have to play. Jack Larson, you won a red shirt, but he's in a better position. So, and I also think that Mitchell Evans got that necessary, valuable experience last year that he didn't have. Now, So what I would say is if we're going to talk about where this room is now compared to what it was a year ago, it's definitely better. What you're saying, I believe, is that based on what happened in 2023 and what was proven, that it's a wash. Is that fair to say? If I were to ask you, Trevor, how about compared to where the room is now compared to where it was a year ago at this time? Would your answer be different?
I would I would say I think I would still lean on more of a wash. Honestly.
Really?
Yeah, I would, only because in my mind, the way that I view it is I look at it and see, okay, they've had the proven production. Now the other side of that coin is not
They
that.
didn't last year going into the season.
Gotcha.
Because
Okay.
Mitchell only had let me be more clear, because I don't think I answered the question correctly based on your answer. If we were to look at what would your answer be compared to where the tight end room was a year ago today? So
Gotcha.
Mitchell only has 3 career catches. He's come. Eli has one career catch. Cooper's a true freshman. Not how the season played out, but because my thought is it's a no-brainer compared to where it is now, compared to where it was a year ago before the season started.
Gotcha.
But obviously how the season played out, it ended up being a pretty good room. And I misspoke too. You had Holden Stace a year ago last year, which I forgot about as well to factor into your thing, and you don't have him now. So I did forget about Holden Stace.
Yep, that was my bad. I misunderstood what you meant. Taking
good.
it to
It's our first show together, man.
Right.
We're gonna have a couple bumps in the road. You're good, buddy.
No, I appreciate that. I mean, it's yes, taking it where it was at last year today versus now, I'm taking this tight end room absolutely, for sure. But yeah, that's overarching. If it were taking it from today, a year ago, to right now, I'm taking this year's tight end room. All things factored out, I'm kind of calling it a wash. And then seeing, for me, it's a big show me what happens when the season starts. I got to know Mitchell Evans is a proven production, and people nationally recognize him as being one of the top returning tight ends. I just want to be sure before I go out and say this tight end room will for sure be better, that we can overcome the injuries for the 2 main starting guys. But I do agree with your point. If Cooper Flanagan has to be tight end 1, I'm a lot more confident this year than if that was the case last year.
Yeah, because last year your third tight end was Cooper Flanagan because Eli Raridon was out. Eli didn't start playing until almost halfway through the season because he was coming off of his own injury.
Yep.
So, yeah, very fair point. It's going to be interesting to see how – this is not about this discussion. This is just a side note. It's going to be interesting to see how the emergence of the receiving core, if it happens, impacts the tight end room. Because if the receiving core is as much improved as you and I think it's going to be, you have to defend this tight end room way different. That doesn't factor into the discussion we just had. It's just more of a general observation of this team and this position, because this has been such a tight end dominant, offense for so long. If the receiving core does provide the playmaking that you and I think it's going to dramatically change how teams, starting with really Louisville and beyond, defend this football team. It's going to make it a lot harder to defend this football team, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think we'll have to reevaluate how we evaluate the tight end room, right? Like, it's as interesting as it is to say, because this is the first time in such a long time that we've been in a position to say we might have, a very elite receiving room from top to bottom. And we don't have to have, in previous years, in 2022, based on injuries and style of play. If Michael Mayer doesn't go off that year, we're just not. I mean, the offense won't be able to move the ball.
Screwed.
Yeah.
They're screwed. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you've had that in previous years. I mean, luckily, I don't even want to know what the outcome would have been at the Ohio State game and what the final score would have been last year if Mitchell Evans doesn't have a game that he has.
He was their offense.
Exactly.
Until the late in that game when they finally started giving the ball to Audric and he started leaning on him.
Yep.
Mitchell was your offense. And the same thing against Duke. That's even more so. Take Mitchell Evans out of the game against Duke, and they don't win.
Yep.
They could not cover him. They could not cover him last year. And not just on that final drive. I mean, it was from jump. They had no answers for Mitchell Evans. None.
Yeah.
So you are correct.
Yep. It's going to be interesting to see. This would be a fun thing to revisit. How we evaluate it today, what we're going to talk about in December, and say, you know what? Hey, we were spot on with this, and and go from there.
We'll start with the areas we're spot on, and then somehow we'll have to stop before we get to the areas where we were wrong. We'll just go ahead and leave that part of it out and just focus where we were right.
Yeah.
So let's wrap up with the offensive line, because I think this is the concerning area for me. And I'll just I'll start off with. I don't think in good faith that we could sit here and say that an offensive line that doesn't have Joe Alt is better than an offensive line that does have Joe Alt today. Based on, even with all the issues that the O-line had last year, there's way too little experience for me. Even if they start Coogan or Spindler, and even if they start Tosh, and you're talking about 2 established tackles, an established center, and 2 junior guards compared to a lineup that could potentially have, 3 redshirt sophomores, a redshirt freshman, and a true freshman starting lineup. Could it end up being better? I think actually it could. If everything goes right, I think they're going to be way better inside than they were last year. Way better. So if I were to break it into 2 groups, remember how they used to have center guard coaches and then tackle tight end coaches? If we were to do it like that, I think they're going to be better on the inside. Because I wrote an article today, Trevor, and I made this statement. If Notre Dame wanted to, they could have a team with far more experience. A team with over 50 career starts starting against A&M. They could have brought back Zeke Correll and his 20-some plus starts. They could just say, hey, we're going to go with Rocco and Pat Coogan again, and we're going to be a very veteran team, and we're going to start Tosh at left tackle and 5th-year senior, 6-year senior, and then, whoever's at right tackle, right? But they chose to tell Zeke, we love you, thanks, but we're moving on, because the less experienced but more talented player had proven to be, in their opinion, a better option. They don't have Rocco Spindler starting as a second-year player at right guard because Billy Schrauth beat him out. They didn't have Tosh Baker as a 5th-year senior at right tackle because Emil beat him out. And so I think the potential is better as a whole. No one's going to sniff Joe Alt as a player. But the potential as a whole is better than it was last year. But right now, today, when we don't even know who the starting 5 is going to be, the only way I could tell you that it's better is if I was just like, you know what, bro? I'm going full homer today. I'm taking off these glasses. I'm going to go get some green ones that say ND on them, and we're going to say the O-line's better. That's the only way you could say it. Now, optimistically, if happens, it could be better. But we just got done talking about how well that worked out for us when we had that conversation about the receiving core last year. You never want to go in with ifs, and especially on the offensive line. And for me, that's why it's just the O-line going into last year was better.
Yep. Yeah, I agree. I'm on the same page as you. I do think it is a more interesting conversation than what some people might think that it would be. Because, again, you look at, well, we lose Blake Fisher and Joe Alt. Of course, the O-line's not going to be as good. You break it down, to your point, I looked at it the same way. The interior of the O-line, I think, is going to be better. And I judge good offensive lines by consistency, right? Which is why I think that a guy in Emil Wagner could live up to playing and filling that void of Blake Fisher, because for as good as Blake Fisher was against Ohio State, it was just, you kind of had to ride the wave with him 100%. And so if you would ask me at the end of the season, who would I rather have, Blake Fisher or Emil Wagner? If Wagner's the more consistent player, I'm taking Emil Wagner. The biggest question is around what happens on the left side of the offensive line. And that, to me, was more of the deciding factor of who I would take. I don't want to center this around Joe Alt, but again, we don't even know who the 5 are going to be. I'm very confident, and I know who 2 of them are. But outside of that, we're going to kind of have to see what happens, ideally sometime in the next week. Because I don't want to be having this, here in Marcus Freeman's press conference next Monday, and it's game week. And the answer is, we are going to put the best 5 out there, and we'll let you know when we know.
I'm okay with that answer as long as they know what the answer is. I'm okay with him telling, right? And I get, that's what you were saying. I get what you were saying. You were being realistic, practical. If that answers the truth, right, then it's a concern. Yeah. We'll probably get that answer, but it won't matter if that, it's more about, okay, but my hope is that when they go to the practice field yesterday and today, that they've got their starting 5, at least what they think it's going to be established. Now, if somebody outplays somebody for the next week, okay, cool, you make that change, but we're going to want them to have as much time as possible.
Yep.
Looking at that offensive line as much possible to come together, and the coaching staff is certainly going to need that to be the case. So right now, definitely not better. It definitely has a chance to be better as a whole. There's no question. Now let's wrap this segment up by looking at it from the standpoint of the offense as a whole. Well, actually, you know what? Let's do it this way. Coaching staff. I'm going to throw a little curveball at you that we didn't think about. Coaching staff. Is this coaching staff better now than it was a year ago? I think that answer is obvious.
Yes. Yeah. I am very hard leaning on the side of yes.
Yes, it's this might be the biggest difference. And I liked Jared Parker more than most. I think he was a smart guy, had potential to be even better. Notre Dame did set an all-time scoring record last year, but it's the big games where his inexperience shined. And Mike Denbrock has that. So he's better. And I'm not saying this is like Jared Parker sucked. Like, well, okay, how did he suck when they set a scoring record and scored had more games of 40 points than any time in school history? He just wasn't there. He wasn't ready to shine in the biggest moments. That's what hurt Coach Parker. Now, maybe he got better this year. Maybe. But that's just, it's just not. Mike Denbrock's a far more proven coach. Mike Brown's a better coach than Chancey Stuckey. Not even close, in my opinion. And then now Gino, Dylan, or Gino and Joe Rudolph are going into year 2 now, as opposed to year 1. And Dylan McCullough is one of the best in the business, and he's not going to get worse the longer he's in Notre Dame. So I think the coach, from a coaching standpoint, is significantly better, and that can't be ignored when we talk about, like, if you don't think Joe Rudolph's a great O-line coach, that's fair. That's fine. He has to prove himself. He's not a great O-line coach right now. But I have a hard time thinking he's going to be worse as a coach. Not the line, but him worse in year 2 than he was in year 1. Now that he's got a year of working with these guys, that rarely happens where guys actually get worse in year 2. Now, of course, it did happen last year with Notre Dame when Chancey Stuckey was worse in year 2 than he was in year 1. But Chancey Stuckey was a neophyte coach who'd never really been a real coach before. He was a real coach for 1 year at Baylor. Joe Rudolph's been around for a minute. So I have a hard time thinking he's going to be worse in year 2. And the rest of it's just better. So way better. So now let's look at it overall as a whole. Actually, you already said yes, right? You did answers. Yes, it is definitely better.
Yep.
Now, with that being factored in, is the Notre Dame offense in 2024 better right now, in your view, than it was through the 2023 season?
Offense as a whole, including coaching staff, players, everything from 10,000-foot view. Yes. Yeah, I will take this 2024 offense for a laundry list of reasons. One, I like the potential at quarterback more. I was one of those guys where I was excited that we got Sam Hartman last year, but looking at it schematically, I knew there were going to be some bumps and bruises with his adjustments, starting with him having to learn to take snaps under center when he came to South Bend. That to me was an indicator of, okay, this isn't just going to be as simple as let's plug and play here. I like our offensive coordinator. Really the captain of the offense and kind of pointing it in the direction it needs to. I'm with you. I was not a Jared Parker hater last year. He learned in his first year as an offensive coordinator that unfortunately at Notre Dame, you have 12 games, you get measured by 4 of them. And
that's how it should be at Notre Dame. I'm not saying, it's unfair to, no, it's unfair to the harshness in which he's critiqued by some is unfair. The point that they're making in their criticism is not unfair. No, he did not do a good enough job in those big games. But though he was over his head, he's a bum. That's nonsense.
Agreed.
Right? But this is Notre Dame. You're judged by what you do on the biggest stages, and that's how it should always be.
Yeah, absolutely. Marcus Freeman learned it in 2022. Unfortunately, I hate to bring up the Marshall game, but he learned the hard way that whenever anybody comes to play you, whether it be a neutral site in South Bend, at their house, it's their Super Bowl. And he learned that the hard way. And so then fast forward to last year, what happened? The teams that we should have beat by 21 points or more, we did, right? I think getting back to which team I would take, I'm taking this year's quarterback. Overall as an offense, I'm taking just the ceiling's higher. There's significantly less what-if questions. There are more around the offensive line, but I've heard you guys talk about it in other shows. The offensive line doesn't have to play at a Joe Moore Award level winning championship offensive line for us to compete for a national championship this year. They just have to be good.
Yep.
And I think they have the potential to do that. So I'm taking the 2024 offense.
I am as well, and it's not really close. I mean, you're better on coaching is better, more experienced, more big game experience. You're better at quarterback. You're deeper at quarterback. You're at least deeper and more explosive at running back. You may not be better, but you're more dynamic. You're more dynamic. You're deeper. You're more experienced. You're more proven at receiver. At the very least, tight end's a wash. If I forced you, Trevor, to say one is better or one is worse at tight end, I'd be curious what your answer would be. Like, you can't just go wash. You have pick. But it is close, so it's not going to be worse, I don't think, than last year. And then offensive line, same thing. Does it have a Joe Walt in it? No, it doesn't. Is it going to be as good in game one as they were against Ohio State last year? Highly unlikely. Can they get better during the season? Sure. I mean, so while the offensive line could end up being the kryptonite to this team is in regard to winning a championship, that is flat out true. I still think this offense is better than it was a year ago. I don't know if it's a championship caliber unit yet. The offensive line is going to determine that ultimately, but it's certainly better than it was last year. I'd feel a whole lot better going to play Ohio State with this group of players and coaches than I did last year. And
yeah,
that's a no doubt. That's a no brainer. Like, I would have far more confidence that the Clemson game is going to be completely flipped with this group than what we had last year. From what we saw from Notre Dame last year heading into that game and how that game played out.
Sure. The only way that I'm taking facets of the offense in 2023 is if we get as granular to say, I'm taking this left tackle, I am taking this number 2, insert whatever. That is where I would draw my differences. But a unit as a whole, I mean, I'm probably looking at it to start this year. Running back is still tough because it depends on the scheme you're in. I'm taking this year's receiving core, this year's quarterback. Tight ends, I would take this year for the sole fact that the floor is being raised. But yeah, it'd have to be really granular for me to pick something in.
You just said something really interesting that I didn't think about to do the show is, what would your all Notre Dame starting lineup be if you could take last year's group or this year's group? I'm going 24 Riley Leonard at quarterback,
Okay.
23 Audric at running back.
Mm-hmm.
If I could say which depth chart would I want, I'd probably go with this year's, but I'm just talking starting lineup. My receiving core would be Chris Mitchell, Jaden Greathouse, and probably Bo Collins or 24 version of Jaden Thomas.
Mm-hmm.
My tight end would be 24 version of Mitchell Evans because he's more experienced. He gained experience from last year. My left tackle is Anthony Knapp. Totally kidding. Joe Alt. My left guard would be whoever starts at left guard this year, whether it's Pat Coogan, Rocco Spindler, or Sam Pendleton or Sullivan Absher, because whoever wins that job is going to be better than what Pat Coogan was last year.
Mm-hmm.
Center, I'm going with Ashton Craig. Right guard, I'm going with Billy Schrouth. Right tackle, I'd go with Blake Fisher. Now, I think Emil, to your point, Emil may end up being a better player than Blake, but I know what Blake was, warts and all. I knew what Blake was on his best day. I knew what Blake was on his worst day. I have no clue what Emil is going to be. So I'm going with Emil at right tackle, Blake at right tackle. So I think that's what three starters from last year's team on this year's team. If we just look at the starting lineup, I think that says a lot. Now, to answer Raymond's question from earlier, Raymond, if you want to look at statistics for me, it's with Riley Leonard, it's going to come down to total yards per game and touchdowns. Maybe Riley throws for more. I actually think Riley's going to throw for more yards than Sam did last year but that's not going to be Riley versus Sam. That's going to be more of a byproduct of what was around the two quarterbacks. So I don't think that's really fair. But if to talk about how, if Riley's having the impact that we hope, it's about yards per game and touchdowns. That's really what I want out of Riley Leonard. I want him to be over 280 to 290 yards per game minimum of total offense, rushing and passing, and I want him to be averaging about 3 touchdowns a game. That's really where I want him to be. Regular season average of about 2.5 to 3 touchdowns a game. Running back, it's going to come down to yards per carry, yards per touch, rushing and receiving. And then can you match that? the short yardage situations is ultimately going to tell me the difference. If they can figure out a way to match last year's success, and that could include Riley Leonard, then as far as the offense, then I'm going to feel that that's how this running back room is better. Higher yards per touch average. Touch means carries and catches. And then how are they in short yards? That could be 2nd and 1, 2nd and short, 3rd and short, and then goal to go situations is going to determine ultimately if this room is better. Receiver, it's that's the easiest one, pure production. And then I also want to see more big plays from structure. Some of the big plays that they had in the receiving game last year were off of broken plays. You think of the Chris Tyree play, some things like that. Are they making more big plays from the scope of the offense? So not Riley running to his right, finding a guy coming across the backside for a 50-yard touchdown. I mean, within the structure of the play calls, are they producing more 30-plus yard big plays? That's the one thing I would look at specifically beyond just overall production. What percentage of the receptions are 30-plus yard gains? 25 to 30-plus yard gains. That's going to tell me a lot because compared to last year. And then, of course, O-line is just going to come down to – I think you nailed it. There's no statistical thing. It's consistency. And if you want to know how the offensive line performs, what are their yards per carry and what are the sack allowed numbers against A&M, Louisville, Florida State, and USC? That's what it's going to come down to for me. So those are the statistics I would look at for that, Raymond. So before we move on to the defense, folks, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast, give us a 5-star review. Some great feedback in the chat right now about how well Trevor's doing today. So I appreciate that. And if you have not done so, sign up for the message board at boards.ourspbreakdown.com. And especially if you're someone who has a positive outlook on the season, we definitely need you to sign up today because there's some cranky people on the message board today that are a little bit nervous about this Texas A&M game. So we need some more of that positivity over there today so we can spruce up the confidence level and the energy on the side a little bit today. I'm being sarcastic, little sarcastic. But anyway, check that out at boards.ourspbreakdown.com.